Hello and welcome to Around the Verse, our weekly look at the development of Star Citizen. I'm Eric Kyron Davis.
And I'm Kirk Tomei. Tomorrow, the April monthly report will be shared with the community. As you probably know by now, the new monthly report is basically a collection of each studio's updates over the past month.
Yeah, and we really look forward to sharing all of our progress with everyone and starting the cycle all over again here in Los Angeles next week. But first, let's go to Wilmslow and see what they've been up to.
Hi, and welcome back again to the UK studios for our latest updates on our progress over the last 4 weeks. Everyone is focused and busily working through all the tasks and bugs for Squadron 42 and of course the anticipated 3.0 update for Star Citizen, which we're very excited to get out to you all as soon as possible. So let's kick off with the gameplay feature sprints which we've been working on. The player interaction system has moved along quickly over the last few weeks. Further improvement of the personal inner thought system will allow you to select functionality which is not directly tied to a particular object. Examples of this would be selecting an emote or exiting your seat, although there will be, of course, still be quicker ways of doing this, through default actions for experienced players. Next up is the air traffic controller sprint, which deals with managing the flow of traffic to a location for both takeoffs and landing. In particular, it is responsible for assigning out and reserving a landing pad when a player wants to land, as well as freeing up that landing pad once they've landed and cleared the area. Similarly, it will deal with reserving a landing pad and spawning a ship when the player wants to take off. The initial stages of the implementation are now underway, and we're working on the underlying structure of how the system works. We've been finishing up functionality on the character status system, which includes bringing the procedural breathing and soup punctures to final implementation. Once this is done, we will focus on getting the system switched on by default in the game. We are also working on pick up and carry, which is a bit of a mashup between the player interaction system and our usable sprint. The usables were more concerned with getting the AI to interact with the objects in the environment, whereas the player interaction system is more for the player UI to interact with the environment. We're now bringing these two systems together to get the player to be able to pick up, carry, and then place objects in our universe. The conversation tech has now completed the initial development of the subsumption tool and to create the conversations with NPCs much more easily. It's been handed over to designers to prove it out by setting up all the different conversations. They'll provide feedback to code on any needed further improvements. The audio team has been working on procedural planet audio processors, including R&D and planning for systems to map and modify audio automatically. Also, work is continuing on the audio propagation system, the breathing system audio for the character status system, and also a dialogue tool that's been called Word Up. For weapon sound effects, the ship weapon toolkit is in progress, which includes reload sound effects for the Gallant, the weapon tail refactor, and multi-positional code support for weapons which will handle summing up the audio for many of the same weapons mounted to a single ship. For ships, the Prospector audio is done, with work on the Greycat and Cutlass Black, which is continuing.
Landing gear down.
The music department continues to work on the dynamically looping cinematic ambient music system, cleaning up dogfighting music logic, the addition of tension system prototyping for the planet-side procedural music, and have also added more music to the launcher. Meanwhile, the graphics team have been working on many separate pieces of tech this month. The first is the integration of real-time lit volumetric fog from Lumberyard, which is going to be a huge boost for the lighting and environment art. The render to texture feature is progressing quickly, and the initial version is in the UI team's hands to upgrade our 2D UIs, and will also soon have the feature usable for 3D holographic projections to power our various holographic displays. The real-time environment probe tech is nearing completion and allows fully dynamic bounce light and reflections on a planet where traditional light baking techniques are not possible. The visual effects team have been working on several sprints. Atmospheric flight effects have completed the first sprint with a pass at planetary entry VFX. The effect is controlled by speed and atmospheric density values. With the core functionality in place for this, as well as engine trails, we're now merging these two sprints as we further implement design and art feedback while optimizing and bug fixing. We have also been working on lighting entity effect improvements. This is where we are attempting to create realistic lightning and other electrical type effects. In other areas, we have completed the first pass for the MISC prospector, including thruster improvements and damage. For weapons, we have continued initial work on the APR Scourge railgun, including the charging and charged effects. Since finishing off the Banu Defender, the concept team has been busily developing the Origin 600i, which is now in its final stages. The weapons team have completed the Preacher Distortion Scattergun and the Apocalypse Arms Scattershot, and made good headway on the Klaus & Werner LMG. The UK ship team has been hard at work since bringing you the Javelin for ship shape. The Reclaimer has made a lot of progress since our last update. On the exterior, we've completed work on the hull and the team was excited to see the huge claw come together. We have now moved into the damage phase of development, splitting the mesh up and getting it ready to use the damage tech. On the interior, we have fully fleshed out habitation and tech decks, as well as an enormous salvage processing room, and now the team is working on finishing the drone room, engineering deck and cockpit. Work has also begun on the derelict ships so that design can start laying the groundwork for mission-specific scenarios, encompassing ships and wreckage. An initial batch of ships that include the Connie, Caterpillar, Starfarer and the Freelancer are being broken down to their structural elements and made to look destroyed. Material work is being pushed alongside to give the ships a far more deteriorated and aged look. A wreckage component is also being worked on so that we have a library of nondescript ship parts that will be used to help embed and integrate derelict scenarios into the environments. The Razor artwork is now complete with the ship and it's gone through a full damage pass. Some cool work has been done on breaking this one into pieces and we're really excited to show you the results. Currently, LODs are being finalised on the hull and Art are working closely with tech design to get this one flight ready. The hull C is also moving along nicely. The hull mesh is now largely complete with manoeuvring thrusters being incorporated and polish work matching up the interior and exterior. A detail pass is also ongoing, adding all the finer details you've come to expect from our ships. The interior has gone through blockout phase and is now well into art production. By utilising assets from other MISC ships, we've been able to create spaces quickly and efficiently with the intention to use these across the whole series. The environment team are continuing to explore ways to create volumetric forms in space with the graphics team. We've been baking out simulations and doing some initial renders. The surface outposts are finishing their interior visual benchmarks for engineering, habitation and hydroponics. These will then be distributed to the various outpost layouts and configurations. The team is continuing to set dress, light and polish these interior spaces to build character, while also exploring options for navigation and branding based on the lore and fiction. The truck stop space stations have moved into the final art phase, so the team is busy building out the shader library and working up some example pieces to final quality. As it's a modular system, we are also continuing to refine the building set to explore potential build configurations which will make sure the set is as flexible as possible. The animation team has been working on the cover AI work with the aim to improve all animation assets beyond functional. Breathing state improvements are now in line with back-end code improvements. This involves getting curve data out of Maya and into DataForge, which will allow for more refined procedural breathing curves. In other areas, the team started implementing multi-directional takedowns for killing enemies that are within close proximity to the player characters. Also, there have been further improvements to weapon setup and reloads across the board, including the Devastator shotgun, the Arrowhead sniper rifle, the Gallant laser rifle, and the P8SC ballistic SMG, as well as melee improvements for pistol and stock weapons. Finally, the Derby Foundry team has been busy with face and body animations for our 3.0 mission givers and has handed over 500 facial animation files that are now ready to be implemented into Squadron 42. The motion capture team has tracked and solved almost 1,000 new body animations for various characters within the persistent universe. The team has also been working on new facial animations for shooting guns. Steve Bender, our animation director, has been a great source of inspiration, so expect to see new improved faces soon. Well, that's our update for this month. Once again, I hope you enjoyed seeing what we've been up to here in the UK, supported as always by all the other studios around the globe. Thanks again for all your support and encouragement and for joining us on our journey to make Star Citizen become this incredible reality. Everyone on the team really appreciates the trust our community places with us, allowing us to create this amazing universe. Without you all, Star Citizen would not be the reality it has become. Thank you, take care, and I look forward to seeing you in the verse.
You know, it's really great to see the progress made on the procedural breathing. When stamina is introduced in 3.0, players are really going to be able to experience the consequences of their actions, like puncturing someone's suit or running for long periods of time.
Yes, it's part of the detailed universe building that we're implementing. First with the rollout of 3.0, then testing the expanding universe from there.
Yeah, and speaking of the 3.0 rollouts, up next we see how the new interaction system influences every aspect of gameplay. Take a look.
The player interaction system touches everything. It's a unified interaction which, across first-person, the experience of shooting, of shopping, of looting when you go up to screens and you interact with those terminals, and also when you get into your cockpit, you fly your ship around, and being able to point at things, you know, with reckless abandon actually opens up a lot of opportunity for interactions of, I want to find out more about that, and we can give back contextual clues of the things that you can do.
So the player interaction system that we're starting to show here is the third version of the interaction system that we've added in the game. The original interaction system is what was in the game in Alpha 2.5 and previous, and it was this kind of mishmash of different approaches to try to figure out what the player was looking at and what they were trying to interact with in the game. After that, we made an Item 2.0 interaction system that tried to be more accurate about what you were interacting with, and so it would use raycasts and collision geometry to figure out the results. That had some issues as far as usability, and so we're adding some new features onto the current Item 2.0 interaction system that makes it more contextually aware about what you're interacting with.
Our old system, it was basically the dreaded use system that basically, you know, we had the bounding box that you had to be inside, and then you can only really have one action tied to that, and, you know, it wasn't very descriptive. It was just use, right? And that's why is kind of deemed as the use system.
To get the player interaction system going, it really required a pretty fundamental rewrite of the interface we would use to interact with objects within the game. For example, for first couple of years on the project, we were so used to just having the big, horrible use prompt on everything. And really, that sort of not only did that not look good, but it also sort of always felt clunky. It was very hard to actually get in the right spot to use stuff. So we had to really sort of come up with a design that gave the kind of level of detail that we wanted to put into the game for the users to actually be able to interact with things that are present in the levels to the level of detail that would immerse them in the gaming experience. So to really make all that happen, the easiest way was to just basically write a lot of this from the ground up, write as a fresh new system as opposed to just going with the old used stuff.
I did a prototype of Cargo, some of the earliest, jankiest bits of that we've done. And as part of that, I did a little section in a freelancer that would detect that you brought a thing in and then show it up on a cargo manifest screen, which was the first time that I made a thing with a cursor on it. Eventually, that turned into MFDs and how you interact with that stuff in the screens in your cockpit. And then eventually became, well, we should unify all of these exponentially growing input systems to something that actually has a core to it.
This is a whole completely new system that's coming in, because before you didn't have a cursor or anything, so it's very hard to tell, what you're actually focusing on. Okay, so this text is popping up on this door, but is it for this door that's to the left or to the right? So by having the cursor and then being able to highlight the objects, which is another thing in the interaction system that we do, is we highlight the actual object that's going to be engaged. So when you bring up the cursor and you have your cursor over the particular item that you're focusing on, you'll get a highlight on the object. So that's additional feedback that is very useful for you to know as a player when you're using this interaction system. It's like, okay, here's the door that I'm focusing on, and here's the actions that are tied to that. I mean, the whole idea is to make all interactions that you can have in the game extremely consistent. So, for instance, if you want to walk up and interact with the terminal screen, that's the interaction system. You can, bring up a cursor, click certain buttons. That can be applied to something where it's like a kiosk where it has a very in-depth interaction where you have multiple buttons and filters and all sorts of things. Or it can be used for like an elevator panel where you're selecting between floor 1 and floor 2 and something simple like that. But also that's just screens, but we can also use that system for picking up objects in the world or interacting with a physical control panel.
As we've gone through iterations of the interaction system, it hasn't changed too much philosophically. It's always been about having the objects in the world sort of dictate how you interact with them in tandem with your current state. We've demonstrated that a little bit with the battery demo that I think we showed in some of the previous footage, where having the battery in hand gives you contextually the interaction to put it into the radar, where you could also manipulate the radar directly and open up the panel and all of those things. But because your current state interacts with the world, you get to have these more natural interactions.
So the way the system would work on a regular basis is the user would press and hold F to go into the interaction mode. They'd then be presented with a cursor that could kind of lead the choice. Choice may also depend on the proximity of the player to the various objects and the way they've been facing and such, but really the cursor would kind of lead the action. and then clicking the left mouse button could actually trigger the action, so that would lead into sort of an animation of picking something up, or it could be inspecting a particular object. And we've also added various different sub modes, such as, like, rather than a left click, if you do a right click, we can zoom in on an object to focus on it a bit more to get that extra detail, so we can see what we're doing with it. So very much cursor led to give us the precision, but then the result that comes out would tend to be something that would be animated.
It was important to me that you'd be able to interact anywhere on the screen for a couple of reasons. One, I really liked the way it felt, and I sort of got sold on that really early, and through iteration there were versions of it that were more and less successful, but I'm really quite fond of it myself. But also, again, with the animation, your ability to look around the world is limited by your animation, by the physicality of your character. And so if there's something that you need to interact with, you need to be able to look at it. And traditionally, shooters manipulate everything through a dot in the center of the screen, which is you, really. All of your interaction capability is a dot in the center of the screen. And that means that if you're going to interact with something, you have to be able to get it to the center of the screen, which isn't so hard when you can fudge the animations a bit. But when you're being really faithful to what's actually happening, it's important to be able to look with your eyes to the edges, and you can reach anything that you can see. So if there's interactions on your body of where you would put items to stow or to access things about the seat that you're sitting in, these things should always be available to you as well.
The way it works is it uses what we call a proximity query. So it checks what's around the player in the local area to see what is interactable, but then also uses some raycasts to figure out what the cursor is currently pointing at. And then using that, it can figure out what its best estimation is for what you're looking at right now, what you were previously looking at, and what is the best result for what you should interact with if you press the interact button immediately. So it's basically this cursor that's kind of browsing the available options to you that are available.
You know, depending on what type of item or what type of action that you're going to invoke on the thing you're focusing on, you'll get different cursors, for example. So you get very specific feedback on, okay, this is a dial, so your cursor might be a sort of like a dial icon that indicates that you can rotate it, or it's this on-screen cursor, you know, that you're over a button, or, you know, things like that. So you get like that sort of feedback that, you know, makes it much more intuitive than if, let's say, if you just use one cursor for everything and there was no feedback.
Building it was a challenge because it required some collaboration, for one, between the studios. We had design here in LA. The main engineering was spearheaded in the UK with support here in the LA studio. And one big part of it was how to get the sophistication of that behavior to work with just, you know, screen coordinates. You have this cursor, you know the player's position. How do we figure out, given this information in 3D space, what is the best solution? And so you're gonna have to do a little bit of math. You have to do a little bit of testing to test it out and prototype and iterate to see what actually works. And the other issue is performance. You know, how do you do all these checks, and how do you make it so smart and intelligent about what you want to do and what the right result is, and still be performant?
The kind of challenges you get with this is, with it being a system that's going to be regularly used for all manner of different objects in all manner of different scenarios, you really need to get that level of polish added to the system to make it feel good, so the player isn't there getting annoyed every time they want to use an object. And also we need to kind of cover all these various different scenarios and situations the player finds themselves in, so that the player can actually do what they want to do with these objects, as opposed to being limited by a system that had been in the CryEngine previously, that was just very kind of flat in what you could do with an object. It's really the kind of situations you'd find yourself in, where whether it was just getting in a ship, often you were just presented with the option to use the thing, as opposed to, like, you know, open me the door, deploy me the ladder, choose to climb up the ladder, actually start the engine. You know, these are all the things that we wanted to add, but we just didn't really have the system there. So it was a real challenge to get that system in place that allowed us to do all these things that we want to do, but also sort of to a nice polished level where that wouldn't feel frustrating or tricky to do.
Part of what's been so difficult about getting this system together has been that as we built the various systems of the game, we had to make them in isolation so that they would function, you know, regardless of the fact that the rest of the game wasn't there yet. So now that we have those things and we want to bring them all together, consolidate them into something that's a bit more robust and sensical, building that is difficult, because you have to take all these really specific behaviors that are tailored to all these systems and create a generic interaction object that needs to sync with a generic usable object, which needs to sync with a generic animation object. And all these things have to, they have to be that generic because they need to touch so many parts of the game. On top of that, there's the fact that we have these interactions that we want to do that need to coexist with a wide variety of gameplay. You could be in a seat, chilling, looking around, browsing mobiGlass. You could be in the middle of a firefight. You could be frantically repairing something. You could be cautiously exploring a derelict. There's all these wildly different experiences that this needs to accommodate. It took a lot of experimentation to sort of feel out what allowed you that degree of expression and nuance without impinging too much on the other systems that were so far afield from what you were doing now. For example, the grabby hands system, as it's been so notoriously labeled, was an exploration of how do we create a system that accommodates all these different types of carried objects, and what does it mean for something to be in your possession, in your inventory, when we don't really have an inventory, where we have physical places on your body. And how do you access those things now? How do you put them into the world? How can you get close enough to take them back? And so a lot of those questions have also extended into this system, you know, which has been a hub of all these things, like the terminals as well.
There's some real intelligence added to the system to create that nice feel of an intuitive kind of selection of the objects that you're close by with, what you're trying to interact with. If you don't add in some sort of intelligence there, it can lead to kind of frustrations as to clearly the player's trying to interact with a certain object that's sat in a particular position, but because, you know, without the intelligence, it might require a very specific alignment of player to object. There might be multiple objects in one scene all close by, so we have to sort of add some kind of intelligence to try and figure out which object the player wants to actually interact with.
Whenever you interact with something in the world, the way that that thing is designated as being interactable is using the Item 2.0 component system. So a designer would create some kind of record for something that they want to be interactable. It could be an elevator, it could be a door, and then they'll give it the interactable component. And on the interactable component, they define the sets of interactions that can be used with it, and then the interaction points that are on that entity, where they want those interactions to be shown. One thing that the new interaction system adds is the ability to kind of have interactions on particular bones and subregions of an entity, whereas previously, the old system made it where you kind of had these large bounding boxes and you would kind of get lost whenever you're trying to find things. It wasn't clear.
So the important thing about having these generic components is it gives us the building blocks to make things that are ultra bespoke. The problem with bespoke content is that it requires a lot of painstaking maintenance, because as you move forward, things about your technology change, things about the environment in which you've placed this content change, and in order to keep it all working lockstep in sync, you have to be really vigilant going through all those things. And when you make your behaviors separated and modular and generic, it makes it so that you can build things out more conceptually. This thing is heavy, but it can be picked up and it takes two hands. So that's going to affect what you can be holding at the time you try to interact with this thing. It's going to affect what's going to be the result of throwing this thing, what's going to be the result of it in zero-G having collisions with other things. And those are fairly simple examples, and already it starts to spiral out into all these possibilities of when you can get really specific in the content that you're making. It's usually because the rest of it has been nailed down.
We'd use similar subsystems within the game, such as the zone system queries, for example, to figure out which objects you could interact with were in the proximity of the player. We'd also use sort of standard engine techniques such as ray casting and other such things to actually determine which of these objects were best to use. But really there was a whole another sort of layer of logic added for this system to give us the feel and the depth that we wanted to add for interactions.
So now there is a through line of input that you can interact with the whole game, and it remains consistent. It adds quite a lot of exciting possibilities. It gives you the opportunity to have essentially a point-and-click adventure game in your shooter. So all of those wild, bespoke interactions that adventure games are built out of are suddenly available for something that is so systemic, such as Star Citizen.
I think the biggest change in player experience is kind of a change in mindset when you're using it. When you use the old interaction system, you're kind of fishing around and you're not sure what you're looking for. When you use the new interaction system, it's more about fluidly browsing what you can clearly see. And it's a really big difference, I think, because you'll walk into a room, you enter into this interaction mode, and immediately you can tell, based on this highlighting that's happening, here's the options about what I can work with right now. What do I want to do given these options? And you can kind of float the cursor around, see what's close, see what the different available interactions for those different objects are. It might be that, oh, I can turn on the engines, or I can turn off the power. Do I want to do that? And so I think it's just a more enjoyable experience. You also don't have to move so much. So previously with the old interaction system, if you wanted to go interact with this thing over here, you'd have to go over there. You have to position yourself, you'd have to look. It just takes more work to look at the different options. Whereas this, you can kind of stay put a little bit more and kind of more fluidly guide yourself through the different options. You don't have to do as much work to see what is all there.
The focus up to now has been on consolidating all of our behaviors and tech to get to the point where, as we're building things, we can just sort of stitch them together conceptually and be able to get really specific with things. And that frees us up to have all sorts of creative ideas. And this is just the start.
So what we're also working on in conjunction with this interaction system is something that we're calling render to texture. And in the UI sense, that will allow the UI to render properly within the rendering pipeline. It'll pick up all the post effects and it'll actually look like it's in the world. So that's another thing that's going to really make this your interaction feel much more in-world. You're part of the game experience. The other thing it'll allow us to do is project onto curved surfaces, which, in terms of like a sci-fi setting, that's probably one thing we will want to have. So wherever your cursor is, it'll allow us to easily negotiate what you're actually over in terms of the UI. So if you're over a button that's on a curved surface, the position of your cursor will, it's easier to map that onto a curved surface with this rendered texture tech. So that's kind of an example of all these different pieces that are going to be coming together to make a fulfilling game experience.
I think the one thing that I would add is that this new interaction system is starting to come online. We're starting to add new things, but there's still a lot that can be added. Like every day, we're thinking of new possibilities for how this interaction system can be used. Where have we used other solutions in the game that maybe can be replaced by this? One thing, for instance, is the item port system in the hangars. That's kind of its own thing right now, but it shouldn't be. It's almost identical to what we're doing with this interaction system. So it doesn't have the same benefits. It's an opportunity for us to unify the systems and gain the benefits from the new interaction system. But beyond that, there's even new, more wild things that we could possibly do. Try to bring more of maybe the ship HUD, for instance, into the interaction system in some parts, to where maybe you could look at something, say, that's displaying the ships that are in the area. It might be possible to then select one of them and then find some information about it or communicate with that particular player. Using the new interaction system, we can generate new interaction points and new interactions at runtime. So it gives us a lot of flexibility with deciding, what behavior do we want to open up to the player, with the benefit that it's all using one system to do it. This game has been very iterative, and I think that's one of the great things about it. But certainly the interaction system is a great example of that. We kind of start with this stuff that we have in CryEngine, and it works. It's not like it was broken, but it didn't have everything that we needed, so we started adding stuff to it. But it was buggy, it wasn't performant, it didn't do quite what we needed, so we kept having to iterate and change and invent and make new things. And now we're getting to this place where eventually, after a lot of work, we're bringing it all together, and I'm really excited once we get it in the players' hands and they can start to see all of these things coming together.
As the guys said, the new system is just the groundwork for more realistic experiences here in Star Citizen. It will continue to grow, just like our universe.
Yes, and it will affect every aspect of the universe to create a more immersive player experience.
Yeah, and before we go, I just want to remind the subscribers that they can fly the Drake Buccaneer as part of our Ship of the Month. Subscribers will also get an Icarus One Holo model as part of their flare this week. And if you're interested in learning about our subscriber program, check out the link in the description.
That's all for this episode of ATV. We want to thank all of our backers for your continued support.
Yeah.
You're the reason we're able to create the best damn space sim ever.
Yeah, and we're also very grateful to all of our subscribers who make shows like this possible. Thank you.
And thanks for watching. We'll see you around the verse.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.